Today I want to share with you one of my absolute favorite recipes, and that is brownies. I know most of you would be thinking, what are you talking about? Brownies, hormonal balance, how are these two going together? And I want to show you how it is absolutely possible. One of the things I love about these brownies is that not only are they free of dairy, there is no, there's no grain in here. So of course it's gluten-free, because as you know, my whole cookbook is gluten-free anyway. But we also don't use any eggs. And about 50% of the people that I work with do have some sensitivity to eggs. And so I know many of you are like, yeah, there's this great paleo brownie, but then it uses a lot of eggs and you can't eat it. So we're gonna do some tweaking here, and I wanna show you how it is completely possible to make that happen. And so let's get started by making a slurry with, this is ground flaxseed. Now mind you one thing, I pre-ground it before we started shooting, but typically in my cabinet, and I'll talk about it in the kitchen makeover, I always store everything in a whole form as much as possible and only grind it for the little amount that you need at a time, or maybe just a little bit extra for the week's worth or so. Not much more than that, because you do lose a lot of nutritional value out of flaxseed, or any seeds for that matter, when it's already pre-ground. So we're using a couple of tablespoons, and the way to substitute eggs with flaxseed, because this is going to be our binder. So flaxseed is going to bind the cake together, the brownie together, and you want to use a substitute of about 1 egg to 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed. And then we're going to be using 2/3 of a cup of hot water. It's important to use hot water because that's what's gonna make the whole flaxseed really gel, okay? I'll just give it a little bit of a stir. As you can see, it's not much, it doesn't look like much of a slurry yet, but if you just give it another 5 to 10 minutes, it will turn into a gelatinous, big slurry mess. All right. So what we're gonna do is set this aside, and let's get started with the dry ingredients first. So you wanna use the large bowl for your dry ingredients, because then we're gonna be bringing in the wet ingredients in. So this is gonna be your master bowl. If you don't have a lot of large bowls in the house, you wanna pick the largest one that you have in the house. I'm using, first of all, the reason why this recipe is grain-free is because I'm using cassava flour. And I know many of you are probably wondering, where do you get cassava flour from? So the brand that I'm using here is called Otto's cassava, O-T-T-O ' cassava, one of my favorite cassava flours. And I do see them a lot of around different health stores, including Whole Foods, where I live in Colorado, already is selling it. And so I suspect that if you go in to check out your health store, it might be available. If it's not, don't worry about it, because you can completely get it online through Amazon like everything else. Then we're gonna use some brown sugar. Then we're gonna be adding some cacao. So now this is cacao powder. I want to show you, this is something outside of my book, but I just want to show you the difference of how different cacao can be processed, and the different colors and textures that you can get from cacao. So this is the ordinary cacao that you typically get in the store. Of course, I'm using everything organic, that's sustainably grown, preferably fair trade if you can. Compare this to this cacao. Can you see what a difference in color there is? I'm going to show you the back of it. Very dark, very, very dark, right? Brown. Now this one is a different form of cacao that's processed in a different way. It's called the black onyx. So if you want to be a little playful and turn this brownie into literally like a mud cake, then this is a fantastic cacao to give it a shot. I found this in a health store here in Colorado. We have a very wide selection of fantastic food here. Perhaps where you live, you might not be available. Again, you can check it out on Amazon. So I'm using a lighter brown form of cacao, the one that's available pretty much in every store. The next thing we're gonna do is, as always, some salt, pink Himalayan salt. That's what I regularly use. And lastly, we've got some baking powder. Okay, so that, with a little whisk, let's just combine all of that together. Okay. All right, and now we're ready for working with our wet ingredient, sorry. All right, now the first thing you will see that is gave this brownie recipe the name velvet brownies, right, is because of the usage of beets. The reason why I'm using beets here is for two reasons. Number one, they are incredibly nutritious, right? Sally Fallon always says that beets are like the cleansers of your blood, and typically in a lot of different cultures that's what they're really used for. In China, for example, beets are used for people who have dirty blood, right? And so, but also, you know, from a Western perspective, beets are fantastic for cleansing your liver. And so there are specific pathways like the methylation pathway that actually beets are super supportive towards that. And when you read my book, you will know that the health of the liver is one of the key organs that is responsible for helping us to metabolize the antagonistic or harmful hormones. So make sure that when you're grinding the beets, you're using the smaller grinder. Otherwise, you're gonna be pulling out strings out of your mouth when you use too big of the grinder. So let's see. We've got melted coconut oil right here. So I'm gonna pour that in. That's gonna give it a nice thick, creamy texture. And next, we'll have applesauce. And you know, the reason why I'm using applesauce is partly to replace the eggs. That's a very common replacer, but then we also want to use it because it just gives a wonderful, that sort of a moist texture to our brownies. The brownies that I'm making here tend to be a little bit on the moister side. So, you know, if you have a fan of sort of a dry brownie, that's not the recipe for you. Let's see what else. We've got vanilla extract, and the classical vanilla that we definitely want to put it in here. And then let's take a look at our slurry right now. So you can see it has definitely congealed much more right now. So we're gonna combine a little bit more, and this is really the consistency we want. When that gets cooking, when that gets baked, then it firms up, and that's really what's gonna be holding our brownies together. So I'm gonna pop that in here as well. Let me switch. Actually, I'm gonna use a spatula. Might be a little bit easier to get this going. And you know, you probably guessed it by now. If you follow me for a while, I actually love to use my hands. And a lot of times I just dig in there and use my hands to do that. Which I might do that actually combining the dry ingredients with the wet ingredients. I mean, you look at the colors already beginning, there's that beautiful pink. It's just that itself looks so healthy. Okay, so our baking pan, I'm just gonna make sure that we got that spread out properly. And so we wanna put I've got some coconut oil at the base of the form already. So we wanna get that done. Okay, so that's ready to go. And the next item will be just really what we're doing right now is combining these two together. And for this, I am going to use my hands just because it is way easier to mix. As you're working through the dough, you definitely want to pick up the pieces from the bottom because that's where still a lot of the dried goods are. One of the things about working with a brownie dough is that you don't want to overmix it. That's why it's better to fold it, be folding it, rather than you don't need to knead it the way you knead bread. This can result in a pretty dry brownie, a tough brownie. All right, once that's done, you can see this is this nice consistency we're looking for. We want to fold in our pecans. You can also use walnuts, you can use macadamia, you can use hazelnuts. It's absolutely up to you. Just gently fold them in. Pretty much we're ready to place it in our baking pan. And then using your fingers, your hands, just spread the dough. As you can see, by that time, it doesn't really stick anymore. This is just from the initial mixing. If you like this brownie to have a very dark, rich color that looks like a mud cake, then you might want to use that black onyx cacao that I was telling you about. Then it's not gonna look so pinkish, but we can fix that in a second. I'll show you after this is baked of what we can do next. Well, great, so that's pretty much it for now, and what we're gonna do is pop it into a preheated oven of 350 Fahrenheit and make some magic. So the brownie is out of the oven. One of the things you have to resist is the temptation of eating the brownie right away when it's out of the oven. It's gonna be very gooey, and so it's really important that you bring the temperature down to room temperature. It can be warm, but definitely not hot anymore. And this is where we get the kind of consistency we're looking for. Before I cut up the brownie to show you what it looks like inside, I wanna just show you a couple of things you can do to be a little bit playful with this recipe. That's not in my cookbook, so I wanted to give you something extra that makes a little bit of a difference. So remember how I was telling you about the black onyx cacao that is very dark in color, right? The brownie right now is kind of like reddish. It's got that velvety color to it, right? Undertone to it. So just for the fun of it, let's just spray it. Let's just sprinkle it with some black cacao. And so we're gonna put that into a little, you just wanna sprinkle that around. I'm gonna create a bit of a surprise element to our brownie. Now, one more thing I would like to do on top of that is bring in something like a rose powder. You see the color of it, right? It's slightly pinkish, and really what I've used is just rose buds. I'll put that through a grinder, and you get this beautiful powder that smells like roses. Now, the cool thing about this, and I've done this many times before, is you sprinkle that on top, and the first reaction you get from people is like, what's that taste? What's that thing that you put in there? And the answer is, well, roses. So I'm gonna put a little bit of that and just very gently sprinkle that around. You don't need a lot to get beautiful flavor out of the roses. Okay, so that should be ready. All right, you ready to dive in? Let's see. That's our brownie. It's definitely more on a dense side and rich, velvety. I can't wait to have you try it as well. I'm gonna dig in if you don't mind. So there we have it, a brownie that is definitely on a thick consistency side, feels very rich and decadent. Because we sprinkled it with some rose powder, it's got that rosy, luxurious taste to it. And it's healthy. It uses those beets that I talked about, that supports your liver. It's a healthy snack. Of course, we want to have it with limitation because it does contain sugar, right? But you know, it has no grains. There's no gluten in it. We're using no eggs. There's no dairy. And if you're concerned about sugar, then reduce the amount of sugar that I've used to something that matches your health benefits or your health goals. Well, I hope you try it.